Attention senators, the legislature will reconvene in 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber. The afternoon session is about to reconvene. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Do you have any items for the record?
I do. Mr. President, your Committee on Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs, chaired by Senator Brewer, reports Legislative Bill 569 and 624 to general file, both having committee amendments. That's all I have at this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We will proceed to the first item on this afternoon's agenda, Mr. Clerk. Returning the queue, Senator Hunt, you are recognized to speak, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll yield my time to Senator Michaela Cavanaugh.
Senator Cavanaugh, 4 minutes, 55 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Hunt. Before we broke for lunch, well, I hope everyone had a nice lunch. Before we broke for lunch, I was going to read Thomas Goldberg's testimony. I do wonder, I've been trying to stand further away from my mic, and you can still hear me. I feel like my mic is like super loud. Sometimes it's really loud. Just notice that. And some people's mics are like, they'll be too far away and you can't hear anything they say, but you can still hear me when I'm far away from my mic. Just an interesting observation I had. Okay, well, actually, it's interesting to me. I should not declare that it is an interesting observation. Other people might find it to be a very mundane observation. Okay, so Mr. Thomas Goldberg testified in support of LB 617. Thank you, Chairwoman Slama and members of the Banking Committee. My name is Thomas R. Goldberg. I am a Vice President for Strategy at Nantero, and in a prior incarnation, not incarceration, was one of the principal subject matter experts that drafted the authorization legislation known as the CHIPS for America Act. Natero supports both LB 617 and LB 617. With regard to LB 617, Natero supports the workforce development component relating to the federal CHIPS for America Act to its establishment of the Economic Development Fund in support of collaboration between Metropolitan Community College and the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Support education expansion, curricula development, and staff hires meets the demanding perspective requirements for the CHIP for America Act. That act, specifically Section 9902 B22AA, states that covered entities seeking funds have made commitments to provide training and educational benefits paid by the covered entity, and BB through programs to expand employment opportunities for economically disadvantaged individuals, and 3, secured commitments from regional educational and training entities and institutions of higher education to provide workforce training, including training and job placement for economically disadvantaged individuals. This legislation ensures that semiconductor manufacturers locating in Nebraska will have the means of achieving these 2 elements of the Act's prescriptive eligibility criteria. Let me emphasize that in order for a covered entity to become eligible to submit a bid under the CHIPS for America Act, it must partner with regional, educational, and training entities and institutions of higher education. The U.S. Department of Commerce Emerging Evaluation Scoring System is weighted so that 51% of that evaluation is aimed at the eligibility criteria. LB 617 makes a significant contribution towards enabling covered entities to meet those requirements. Nanotero meets the other eligibility criteria.
1 minute.
Thank you. Elements through its choice of location under Section 9902B22, having made commitments to worker and community investment that benefit economically disadvantaged individuals by choosing a site in a metropolitan statistical area of the state that has a mean income for a family of 4 that falls below the national average. LB 616 will provide another benefit required by the Biden administration's implementation of the CHIPS for America Act, namely partnership between covered entities and state and local governments. I think I am about out of time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh and Senator Hunt. Senator Kavanaugh, you are now recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, so this is the motion to reconsider the adoption of AM 1379, Senator McDonald's bill. AM 1379 is the CHIPS bill LB 617. It was before lunch, voted on and adopted. I've made a motion to reconsider the adoption. I don't have a horse in this race. Vote for the motion or don't vote for the motion. I do like to remind you all that anything like my motion needs 25 green votes to be adopted. So you can vote against it. You can abstain from voting. You can check out, not vote at all. It is incumbent upon me to get 25 votes for my motion to be adopted. I very highly doubt that it will be. I'm not voting for it. So, we'll see. When we returned from lunch, we had about 5 hours left on this bill. 5 hours and 15 minutes to be precise when we started, but 5-0. 1-5, yes, 15. 5 hours and 15 minutes to be precise, as I love to do. Be precise, not usually, but I didn't pay attention to when we started. I think we started at 1:10. I'm going to say 1:10. We started at 1:10. So 5 hours and 15 minutes from when we started at 1:10. And it is 1:17. And that is some math that I should be able to do.
7 o'clock.
But we have a 30-minute break for dinner. Are you taking into account the 30-minute break for dinner? We are taking into account the 30-minute break for dinner.
I'm already
I'm phoning a friend behind me. So 1:10 plus 5:15. It'll be after 7 o'clock, actually. It will be 25, 6:25. No, it'll be 6. If we take a 30-minute, it'll be 6:55. All right. If we take a 30-minute break for dinner, cloture on this bill will be 6:55. It took a village to get there on that math. Just going to write that down. 6:55. That's helpful. The reason it's helpful for me to know is that we have other amendments and motions pending. And so I'm trying to figure out exactly how much time I need to take on things and if I need to draft anything additional to take up more time. And so that's hence the math. And each motion that I have, I personally can take 25 minutes on because I can do a 10-minute open and then 2 times talking and then a 5-minute close, 25 minutes. So I have 3 motions and I then would have 3 motions to reconsider. So that is 25 minutes times 6 motions, 0, carry the 3. 12, 50. That is 150 minutes, which is 120. That's 2.5 hours. So I have 2.5 hours worth of motions for myself, which means I need about another 2.5 hours worth of talking. Now, I know we have another amendment coming up, so I'll take my times on that. That's Senator Wayne's amendment. That'll be another 15 minutes. And then I do a motion to reconsider on that. That's another 25 minutes. So now I'm up to 150. Thank you. Plus 40. I'm at 190 minutes. And then I can take my times when we vote on FA 56. Again, that's another 15 minutes and a motion to reconsider another 15 minutes. So that's another 40 minutes. And so we're just going to keep doing the math here. What I'm essentially doing and doing the math here is trying to figure out if I need to put anything else up on the board in the next 5 hours. I'm kind of hoping not because it's just a lot of work for other people when I do stuff like that. So if
That's
I
time,
can-
Senator.
Thank you. Call the House roll call vote. Actually, call the House machine vote.
There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
18 ayes, 3 nays, Mr. President, place House under call.
The House is under call. All members present, record your presence. All unexcused senators, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. All senators are present. The question before the body is reconsideration of AM 1379. Mr. Clerk, call the roll. Oh, there's been a request for machine vote. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
2 ayes, 34 nays, Mr. President, on the motion to reconsider.
The motion fails. And I raise a call. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, concerning LB 92, the next item, Senator Wayne would move to amend FA 56 with FA 57.
Senator Wayne, you're recognized open.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment, I hope people listen to this. This amendment is actually just to remove LB 68 from the package and any amendments that were connected to LB 68. And here's the reason. If you look at medical malpractice and overall, it's keyed into, actually, let's back up. There were 3 bills that kind of touched on this area. There's a punitive damage bill, medical malpractice bill that I introduced that includes provisions of Senator Slama's LB 68, and then LB 68 in and of itself. For whatever reason, the executive committee moved LB 68 to banking against a re-reference letter. I did not file a motion in front of the body. So what we have is a medical malpractice trust, we'll call it a fund. But we also know that medical malpractice in general is a problem in the state of Nebraska. I brought this scenario up, and here's an example I'm going to use again. If a doctor wakes up and decides to get drunk in the morning, drives to work, performs a surgery negligently because of being under the influence of alcohol, that is capped at $2.5 million. The same day after the surgery, the doctor gets in his car and hits somebody on the street. That is not capped. Tell me in what world it makes sense for your licensed profession to have a cap on it, but your everyday license doesn't. That's the general issue with a medical malpractice cap. I'm not saying today, let's get rid of the cap, but what I am saying is before we fund a fund, let's look at the overall picture of what it does, and let's have an interim study jointly with judiciary or in banking. I don't really care where it goes, but to understand the actual fund and where it should move. And why is that 2.5 million important? Well, 2.5 is important because the people who typically hit that cap are children, and they spend the rest of their life on the state's dime for an accident that a doctor who had a license did. We pick up that tab the rest of that kid's life. Think about that. We are subsidizing their neglect, and in no other industry is that okay. Construction, no. Farming, no. Insurance, no. As attorney, no. No other industry but this one. And I'm not saying we should get rid of the cap. That's not what my amendment does. My amendment says take out LB 68 and let's understand the overall picture. And how I got to the overall picture is looking right across the river at what Governor Reynolds has done in Iowa. They passed medical malpractice reform. They didn't increase it per se, actually didn't increase it at all. They actually took it down a little bit. But what they did is they looked at the punitive damages, they looked at the whole system and said, where does it fit and how does it make sense? Right now, LB 68 is just a sliver of the problem. But if you start funding it and we don't know what we're doing with the rest of these pieces, to me, it's not what we should be doing. It's not good policy. So I'm truly making a policy argument here. Punitive damages was voted out of committee. It is on the floor. However, Senator Ibach wanted an attorney general opinion, so it is sitting. I haven't asked the speaker to schedule it. And in fact, when I spoke with Attorney General Hilders, I said, I'm looking at doing an overall package and we probably won't get to it this year. I.e., I don't know if it's on the front of his paper to get it done immediately, because my understanding is that's the goal, is to look at everything. I had multiple conversations with the speaker about 68. There was conversations about it not being included. I understand why Senator Slama did. But I think if we're going to look at this, we need to really look at it from all sides. And again, why that cap is important is because there are cases, and I can pass them out and do all this, but you can Google them, where juries award $12 million for a kid who had a surgery performed that totally messed up this kid for the rest of his life. Because of our cap, it's lowered down to 2.5. But that kid has over $12 million of medical expenses in future. Do you know who picks that up? We do. We pay for that. I'm not saying today if that's right or wrong, but I'm saying before we start putting more money into a fund that has been doing just fine. Yes, it's a little underfunded, but they haven't came crawling to us saying fix it right now. I'm saying let's look at the overall thing. And the reason this is important is because when Senator Lathrop was chair of Judiciary for 2 years, Department of Insurance said they would get us an analysis of the overall fund. I still have yet to see that. Maybe he had it and never shared it with anybody, but we should definitely look at the overall picture of medical malpractice. And again, we like to do what our neighbor states are doing for everything else. In fact, Governor Reynolds called her overall package with punitive damages. And again, Hilders may come out, Attorney General Hilders may come out and say it's not constitutional. Then we don't have to worry about that element. But the point of it is in Iowa, it actually was used to save rural hospitals when they looked at the overall package and their fund. And you can Google it. It's not Justin talking. You can look up medical malpractice, Iowa reform. Governor Reynolds said the entire process was about saving rural rural Iowa hospitals. And I'm saying before we just start funding something, let's step back. You can have an interim study and we can figure out what the overall picture looks like, whether there is punitive damages, whether there's not. And I don't want to get in a punitive damage debate because it's not just a simple negligence. It has to be, gross and reckless, which is a whole different standard, but that's a different debate. But I do think it's important that we look at everything and not just take a sliver. Again, all this amendment does is remove LB 68, which LB 68 increases thresholds for to pay into the fund, but we're not looking at the overall problem. If somebody goes into the hospital, a surgery, 2 surgeries, 3 surgeries, that gets expensive. But right now they're all capped. That's another conversation we should have. Maybe we leave the cap the same. Maybe we lower it. I don't know. But just moving one piece of the lever without looking at the overall system is not how we should be doing business down here. I don't think it's healthy for what we do. And unfortunately, I don't know if we're even paying attention because when people get on the mic, people just been talking so much, we kind of turn a deaf ear. But I do hope we step back and think about that. There are 3 parts of medical malpractice. One, the Supreme Court has said, I think erroneously about punitive damages, and that bill is on the floor on general file. I have not pushed it because I waited for Senator Ibach to get her ruling back from Hilders. The second piece is, what is the cap and is it the right cap? Does it make sense? Should we increase the cap for just medical? Should we lower the cap for medical? Should we increase the cap for medical but say, hey, general damages, pain and suffering, that's capped at a different cap? Should there be a catastrophic exception? So when we're only talking about children who are going on the state's budget, maybe that's an exception, but everybody else is capped. We should have that conversation. I think it's a healthy thing to do. I don't think it's healthy to piecemeal legislation that can have significant impact on an industry. So that's why I'm asking for a green vote to remove LB 68, and I'll be here to entertain and answer any questions. Again, I'm not saying I'm opposed to LB 68. I'm saying there's no reason why we have to do it now without looking at the overall picture and making sure everybody's at the table. As you all know, once you start piecemealing legislation like this, parties don't tend to come to the table anymore, and it makes it more difficult to have true comprehensive reform, and I don't mean reform to make money for somebody. I mean reform to help rural Nebraska, help Omaha, help Lincoln, help the overall industry like was done in Iowa. And again, that was a Republican-led governor, Republican body who took all three pieces, studied it, and came out with legislation to help save Iowa hospitals in rural Iowa. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. First in queue, Senator Slama, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support still of my own bill, LB 92, and I am grateful to have this debate with Senator Wayne today. We had a similar debate when LB 68 was up as a standalone bill on general file, and I thought it was a very valuable discussion about MedMal and how these different policies are in different pieces of policy are in play in the state and with healthcare in our state. LB 68 did pass on first round 36-0. It got stuck on select file. It was not prioritized. I'd say it'd be a consent calendar worthy bill, which is why we attached it back into the Christmas tree. Just to respond and lay kind of a foundation from my perspective and why we are handling LB 68 the way we are, is that right now our healthcare providers, doctors, hospitals, CRNAs, sustain themselves through this insurance fund to protect themselves from lawsuits. There's a reason why LB 68 was taken to the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee and treated as a separate issue from the overall MedMal cap increase, which, as Senator Wayne put really well, he's got a lot of wonderful experience in this area. Those bills do normally go to judiciary. LB 68 deals solely with the insurance fund, which, yes, actually, those interested parties actually did come to us asking, because the fund is not sustainable as it is structured right now, to raise that limit so that we can ensure that this fund is available to allow healthcare providers across the state to operate without fear of going into bankruptcy over a claim. It's purely an insurance-related discussion, and I'm a big supporter of keeping the insurance side of it, especially when we're facing an underfunded insurance fund, and the MedMal cap, which I think is another solid discussion we can have. I'm wholeheartedly on board for it. We've had it several years in the past of a solid debate back and forth as to whether or not $2.5 million as a MedMal cap is enough. I think that's an entirely separate discussion from the insurance rates. So for me, I'm looking at LB 68. I see it as a very reasonable piece of legislation. It's already been passed through first round one time with pretty overwhelming support. And I'd really appreciate your support of it by voting down Senator Wayne's floor amendment, because this insurance fund is critical to ensure access to health care across the state of Nebraska. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Jacobson, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, Senator Slama kind of stole my thunder, but I kind of want to reiterate that same issue. I appreciate Senator Wayne's concerns, and I can also make it very clear that the reason it got referenced to Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee is because this is an insurance issue. This has nothing to do with what the cap should be. We're not messing with the cap. The cap is currently at $2.5 million. It's always been at $2.5 million for quite some time. We're not messing with that. All we're trying to do is figure out how we're going to rebuild the fund, because the fund is going broke, and that's why we felt like we needed to move forward. That's what this bill is about. It's about insurance, and it's about how do we make this work for hospitals, rural hospitals in particular, and how do we make this work for rural practitioners. And if we want to have a discussion, an interim study on whether that cap should be raised, then have that study. But we're not messing with the $2.5 million cap. Also, I want to refer this back to, okay, the doctor that's drunk and shows up and has surgery. Well, how often has that happened? Okay, you're going into an ER with other nurses and other professionals that are in that room. You don't think somebody's going to notice this person's drunk? I mean, and we also talk about who pays for this person that might be injured and has to spend their rest of their life doing something? Well, who do you think pays for the medical malpractice premiums? Who do you think pays for the cost one other way? I mean, the doctors are going to have to either pass that through to the insurance companies who are going to charge higher premiums on malpractice insurance, which is going to put more pressure on the doctors. We likely lose those practitioners. I mean, ultimately, we all have to pay. So I would welcome a debate and have that done through judiciary on whether those limits should be raised if that's what we want to do. But this is a separate bill. This is a bill that's fixing an immediate problem that's in front of us. Even though the start date isn't until 2025, it's in letting all the hospitals and the practitioners understand that we have to change the arrangement here on how this Hospital Medical Liability Act gets handled, so as to who pays what portion of it under the existing caps that are out there today. We're not messing with the cap. Different story. So I fully support the bill. I thank Senator Slama for bringing it. I appreciate Senator Wayne's concerns. It's rare that I disagree with Senator Wayne because we have a lot of things that we do together. But in this case, I think if you want to have an interim study, have an interim study in terms of where medical malpractice should be. But I can tell you that from someone who's involved with rural practitioners, I think it's appropriate the way it is today, and this bill is not dealing with that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Wayne, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was kind of taken back by the thought of how many doctors would do this or how many kids. We pass legislation for few people all the time in here. And the fact of the matter is, you can Google the state of Nebraska and see that we got over right now $40 million in jury verdicts in the last 6 years that dealt with kids. That's 40, and that's medical expenses. That's $40 million we're picking up as a state. And nobody can deny that. And I think Senator Jacobson would agree with that once medical expenses are too high for a parent to take, they go on Medicaid or DED waivers. That's just what it is. Again, I could read the body. I'm not going to spend too much time. I mean, you guys want to keep going the way we're going, but then we're going to start operating the way we have to operate. But I'm not asking to kill the bill. I'm saying let's look at the overall picture. And nobody, again, no other industry are you capped like this. Not one. You're talking about subsidies. No other industry. And the talk that our insurance might go up or whatever about these caps, incorrect. Other states don't have them. Here's what I will say. I have a year left. We move forward with this without looking at the overall picture, and rural Nebraska hospitals are having problems. Don't ask for my support. Because this is a simple bill saying remove 68, look at the overall health system when it comes to medical malpractice and how it's funded. We're going to throw more money in and create and increase provider rates, Senator Jacobson. And what if we come back and say we can actually lower our cap? Are we going to cut them a check back? No. So we've increased rates for 2 or 3 years for no reason. But we're okay with that because we're going to get this bill done. So when your hospital rates go up, particularly in rural, for the next 2 or 3 years because of this, and then we find out you don't need this, that we have a better solution by looking at everything, and those hospitals maybe lose some doctors, this vote's why. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, this is an interesting conversation, and I welcome it. And I actually needed to look up, because I know Senator Wayne said it at the start, but I forgot which bill number FA 57 is striking. So was going to look that up again. It is important that when we make changes to legislation, and I know we're doing some things today, you know, adding a lot of bills and adding them quickly to make substantial changes. So it says on page 75, strike through lines 24. Well, I don't know what bill that is. I thought it was 68. I think it is 68. Okay. So the original bill of 68, nothing in the Nebraska Hospital Medical Liability Act shall be construed to require the excess liability fund to serve as primary coverage or to provide a defense for or on behalf of a qualified healthcare provider for claims filed against such provider after such claims have exhausted the provider's per incident or annual aggregated limit of liability amount set forth in section 44-2824, whether paid by a professional liability insurer or directly by such provider. So let's see here. We've got in support the NMA and COPIC. I'm not sure who that is. Copic. And then there's the hospital. No, I don't know who this is. An individual, I guess, is a proponent. And Eric Dunning with the Department of Insurance. Hospital Association. Neutral, the trial attorneys. That's interesting. I don't have a copy of their testimony. I would be interested to know what the trial attorney's testimony was on LB 68, since this is what they deal with. And I think Senator Wayne is representing a similar perspective as the association. So I'm looking at the NMA's testimony, members of the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee. My name is Dr. Daniel Rosenquist. I am a family medicine physician in Columbus and the current president of the Nebraska Medical Association, which represents nearly 3,000 physicians, residents, medical students in the state. I would like to thank Senator Slama for introducing this bill, which is incredibly important to the NMA. The NMA has been involved in the Excess Liability Fund since the Hospital Medical Liability Act was adopted in 1976. We continue to feel a responsibility to be good stewards of the fund, even when it means our own members must pay more to keep the fund sustainable. The impetus for LB 68 began in late 2019 as the NMA engaged in conversations with the Department of Insurance about the health of the fund. At that time, the actuarial analysis completed by the Department of Insurance showed that over the previous 4 years, the fund's assets had decreased,
1 minute.
thank you, by more than 8.5 million, or roughly 9.2% for 5 years ending in 2019. The operating reserve suffered losses totaling 26.6 million. To put it simply, there was more money being paid out of the funds for claims than there was coming into the fund surcharge. Just occurred to me that I am reading kind of slowly and Senator Hansen is presiding and cannot tell me to speed up. So he just has to sit there and listen. That's just for fun for me. I know you want to say something, but you just can't. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Sanders would like to welcome 33 fourth graders and 2 teachers from Bel Air Elementary in Bellevue, Nebraska. They're located in the north balcony. Please stand to be recognized. Senator Conrad, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. I wanted to thank my friend Senator Wayne for bringing forward this floor amendment to help sharpen and focus our discussion on some of these key issues in relation to the provision of health care in Nebraska and making sure that we have systems and safety nets in place to deal with not only risk, but of course, when our citizenry is injured, and how those different systems impact our ability to provide care in this state, in particularly recognizing that we already have a lot of barriers and access to care based on geography and workforce issues and provider rate issues and a host of other things, including our medical malpractice systems and caps. The one thing that I did want to make sure to put a finer point on in regards to this measure as it continues, sorry, I'm just still getting over that froggy cough from last week, that froggy throat from last week. As this measure continues to move through is a few members brought up some points that piqued my interest as I was listening to the debate this afternoon. And colleagues, be clear, when we look at some of the major issues impacting healthcare that we have moving through this body, namely LB 574 and LB 626, there are significant changes to the standard of care in Nebraska. And we'll have plenty of time to debate the ins and outs of those specific policies, but it does have implications for things like medical malpractice. And hospitals and healthcare providers are already trying to kind of sort through the different risks and liabilities that come with significant changes to the standard of care and the scope of practice and the ambiguities in the legislation as it is presented and what that can mean for their ability to access medical malpractice insurance in order to continue to provide care for citizens in the future. So it may seem like these issues are disconnected, but actually they're quite closely connected. And if you do a quick Google search or look at even business industry publications about the chaos in the insurance industry and the regulation industry for healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, insurance, hospitals, you can see that it takes quite a bit of time to promulgate appropriate rules and regs, to update the insurance products and the statutory and policy framework surrounding those as well. And all of those pieces weigh into whether or not we're going to continue to have a better healthcare environment for our citizens or have a healthcare environment that has more restrictions and less talented practitioners to meet our citizenry's need, either through an all-out ban or through making the practice so cost prohibitive from a medical malpractice insurance perspective that we see the fate that has befallen our sister states, where more and more practitioners, more and more hospitals, and more rural areas are closing their doors. So we need to be really thoughtful about those implications as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I echo a lot of what Senator Conrad was just saying. So I'm reading supporter testimony for LB 68, and I would say this probably qualifies as expert testimony. The Department of Insurance, the Nebraska Medical Association, the Nebraska Hospital Association, the entities that would be directly impacted by the legislation. This is their testimony. Similarly, the Nebraska Medical Association has come in opposition to the bills that Senator Conrad was just talking about, LB 574 and LB 626. They have clearly come to tell us in their expert opinion how those two pieces of legislation are detrimental to healthcare in Nebraska. And I think that it is inappropriate to say that they are the experts here when it suits what you want to accomplish, but they're not the experts here when it works against what your ideology is. I was told by a member of the body that they have become a activist group. And I said, well, they have like 3,000 members and the majority of Nebraskans are Republicans, so I don't think that they're a activists being code for liberal, progressive, whatever. I mean, most of our medical providers in Nebraska are conservatives, as are most of the people in Nebraska. And it's because that their views and their values and their testimony and the practicality of their industry does not align with an ideology that we are calling them such. I only bring this up because I think that if we're going to treat an entity as an expert testifier, as I believe they are in this instance on LB 68, we should be consistent in how we view them, and we should not malign their testimony as inaccurate or inconsequential when they're telling us how legislation will impact their industry if that testimony doesn't align with our worldview. And I have had entities, the Medical Association included, that have come in opposition to my legislation. And I have found it frustrating, but I have respected their opinion, because when they tell me that something that I am trying to do is detrimental to the medical community, I listen to them because they are the experts. I might question them, I might push back on them, but at the end of the day, I listen to them. I value their opinion, and I value their opinion consistently. So if we are to take them at their word on LB 68, then we should take them on their word, at their word, as the experts in the medical community in regards to medical legislation and changes to standards of care. Thank you, Mr. President. So back to the testimony. Throughout the second half of 2020, the NMA has been working with our partners to determine the best path forward to ensure that the excess liability fund is healthy for years to come. Over the summer and fall, we've had many conversations with stakeholders, including the Department of Insurance, the fund administrator, malpractice carriers and agents, as well as the affected providers, CRNAs, physicians, and the hospitals. At the end of 2022, the Department of Insurance had an analysis completed by an outside actuarial firm, and that analysis showed that the actuarial indicated surcharge has been well over 50% for the past 10 years and as high as 84.9% in 2016 and 76.5% in 2021. The surcharge is capped by statute at 50%.
That's your time,
Thank
Senator.
you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Conrad, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon again, colleagues. I just had maybe a minute or two. I wanted to continue on this thread that I ran out of time on in the last go around, but just to be clear on the intersections between how more risk creates higher costs and how that means less access when it comes to an ever-changing legal landscape in regards to the provision of healthcare, most notably women's healthcare and essential healthcare for trans youth. And so when we see that kind of heightened risk, malpractice and malpractice rates come into play, and that impacts our overall ability to recruit and retain top medical professionals in the state, and then also have access to care for our citizenry every time we see those increased costs. And I want to be clear that in addition to settling cases where there's been wrongdoing, malpractice insurance isn't just about that, but of course, it also is about providing a defense to doctors or healthcare professionals in court, or in a license revocation or disciplinary process. So that's why you start to see those costs spike or skyrocket in that regard as well. So you're going to see anytime you have a legal landscape change, and particularly quickly and significantly on an existing standard of care to a new standard of care, you're going to see medical malpractice insurance pressure. You're going to see pressure on those costs and those payments. Any additional exposure to private lawsuit and to licensure or disciplinary sanction is going to impact the level of risk and therefore the bottom line, and therefore means less access to care for more Nebraskans when we already have a pretty significant set of maternal health deserts in the state of Nebraska and otherwise. So just wanted to point that out and thank the bodies for their time and attention in regards to those intersections with these key healthcare and insurance related issues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak. This is your last time on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, if anybody wants to yield me time, I would happily take it. Okay, so the NMA on LB, well, this is LB 68, which is the amendment that Senator Wayne, the bill that Senator Wayne is attempting to strike from the amendment. Okay, so the surcharge is capped by statute at 50%, meaning the fund is currently being funded at a level well below what is indicated by the most recent actuarial analysis. By raising the underlying limit to $1 million in qualifying coverage, LB 68 would bring additional revenue into the fund because the surcharge will be based on the premium for a $1 million policy. Additionally, settlements and judgments won't impact the fund until they exhaust the $1 million policy limit. LB 68 would increase revenue and decrease risk, yielding a significant benefit to the fund's bottom line. While according to the fiscal note, the Department of Insurance was unable to estimate the amount of additional revenue, it was able to estimate that approximately $8.28 million less would be paid out of the fund over the next 2 fiscal years. We don't take it lightly that what we're proposing would result in physicians, CRNAs, and hospitals paying more. In talking with the carriers, we understand that the current difference in premium between a $500,000 policy and a $1 million policy is roughly a 16 to 20% increase for an individual provider. I'm a family physician in independent practice, and I can tell you that I wouldn't be here advocating for this unless I felt it was needed. The underlying coverage requirement was last increased 19 years ago in 2004. It was previously raised in 1986 and before that in 1976. Healthcare providers today are benefiting from the increase shouldered by fund participants in the past, and we can't neglect our responsibility to do the same for the future of healthcare in Nebraska. We understand that the Nebraska Hospital Association has concerns about the cost and timing of making this change. We value our partnership with the Nebraska Hospital Association, and those concerns are understandable, so we want to assure this committee that we will continue to work together to find the best path forward. I thought that the Hospital Association had testified as a proponent, but maybe not. They testified neutral. Okay. And I don't have their testimony, so I'm not sure what their concerns were, but so then the LB 68, this is a attachment from the Medical Association. LB 68 increase underlying limits for the excess liability fund. The excess liability fund. The Department of Insurance, or DOI, administers the excess liability fund as required by the Nebraska Hospital Medical Liability Act. To qualify for coverage under the Act, physicians, hospitals, and CRNAs must furnish proof of underlying insurance coverage. Currently, hospitals, physicians, and CRNAs must carry a policy with a $500,000 limit per occurrence. Physicians and CRNAs must have a $1 million aggregate limit. Hospitals must have a $3 million aggregate limit. Additionally, hospitals, physicians, and CRNAs
1 minute.
thank you, pay a surcharge based on the amount of the premium they pay for the underlying coverage into the excess liability fund. The surcharge rate is set annually by the DOI, or Department of Insurance, and is limited statutorily to a maximum of 50% of the provider's annual premium. The excess liability fund invests the surcharge funds and pays settlements and judgments which are in excess of the provider's underlying coverage, up to the liability cap, which is currently $2.25 million. Okay, that was my last time. If anybody yields me time, I'm happy to take it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Brewer has guests in the north balcony. Seniors from Burwell High School, please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Hunt, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will yield my time to Senator Kavanaugh. Thank you.
Senator Kavanaugh, that's 4 minutes and 54 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I need to speak up, my soft voice. I have so many different voices, and thank you, Senator Hunt. I have my booming, frustrated voice, which is kind of my mom voice as well. I have my soft-spoken, just reading into the record voice. So I've been using my soft-spoken voice, and I think I was too far away from the microphone, that my soft-spoken voice was too soft. Okay. Why does the NMA support LB 68? LB 68 will reduce risk to the excess liability fund, as only judgment and settlement amounts to over $1 million will be paid out of the fund. Additionally, a surcharge based on a $1 million/$3 million policy for all fund participants will increase revenue into the fund. Reduced risk and increased revenue into the fund are important to improving the health of the fund, which has shown troubling indicators in recent history. According to the most recent actuarial report commissioned by the Department of Insurance, the actuarially indicated surcharge has exceeded the statutory 50% maximum in 11 out of the last 15 years and by double digits in 8 out of the last 15 years. See Exhibit 1, Sheet 1 on page 3, also represented in the table below. So the table below has actuarially indicated surcharges from 2008 through 2022. And I don't think I need to read through those. Between 2012 and 2015, the fund's assets hovered consistently between $91.2 million and $92.9 million. See Table 1 below. Beginning in 2016, however, there has been a steady decline, reaching a year-end low of $84 million at the end of 2019. For the 5 years ending 2019 pre-pandemic, the operating reserve suffered losses totaling $26.6 million. The fund's assets rebounded significantly in 2020 and 2022 due to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which resulted in delayed procedures and slow claims payout, as well as favorable investment results in 2020. However, as the effects of the pandemic subside, the fund can anticipate a significant uptick in claims due to the increasing demand for previously delayed treatment and continued progression of the legal system. The Table 1 is assets and operations of the fund cash basis, has the calendar year, beginning cash and invested assets, cash revenue net reinsurance, paid loss and loss expense, net of reinsurance, administrative expensive, underwriting cash flow net of reinsurance, investment activity, annual change in assets, year-end cash and invested assets. The fund's past 5 years net loss ratios for claims made coverage are respectively 171%, 167%, 136%, 134%, and 112%. In the past 10 years, the lowest loss and claims expense ratio was 113% in 2012. Despite surcharge rate increases and fewer reported claims in 2020 to 2021, the 5-year loss ratio is still 138%. That means net of reinsurance cost, the fund's incurred loss and adjustment expense for claims made coverage was 38% more than surcharge revenues. These trends are especially troubling when paired with the rising severity of claims in Nebraska. According to the National Practitioner Data Bank, the average severity of claims showed an increase in 2012 and has continued to climb, with the highest in 2019 at $653,421. When compared to the country that is almost 2 times
That's your
higher.
time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Reapy, you're recognized to speak.
Mr. President, thank you very much. As many of you know, I did serve as the president of Mercy Hospital in Council Bluffs, which for those of you who may or may not know, that happens to be in Iowa. My experience with personal professional liability insurance was, and I give this to maybe add to the discussion because that Iowa is a state that did not have a cap. We had OBGYN physicians practicing in Council Bluffs, and this was in the year 2008. The annual premium for one OBGYN physician in Iowa in Council Bluffs was $80,000 per doctor per year. We had to compete with the Omaha market, so it threatened the possibility of keeping a program open. We did that partly because of our commitment to family health care, and we were obviously to a Catholic hospital, and we felt that that was very important. It also had an impact on us and would on others in terms of being able to recruit talent, primarily physicians. That cost becomes excessive to the point where, and I could see in some of our rural communities, if they have to pay those kinds of premiums, all of a sudden you have a real threat, even further threat, to the delivery of babies in Nebraska. And I think that that has to be a concern. There are two concerns that I have about healthcare outside of Lincoln and Omaha. One is trauma care, and the other one is delivery of babies. And I think those are both issues. I appreciate, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Reapy. Senator Hunt, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll yield my time to Senator Michaela Kavanaugh if she would like it.
Senator Kavanaugh, that's 4 minutes, 51 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Hunt. Okay, so would Senator Reapy yield to a question?
Senator Reapy, would you yield to a question?
Yes, if it's an easy one.
I should be. Do you support FA 57 or do you oppose FA 57?
I'm sorry, oppose.
Do you support or oppose Senator Wayne's floor amendment?
I would probably at this time oppose that.
Okay, that's what I was trying to listen, but also have another conversation while you were talking, and so I didn't quite catch where you were at on the actual.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to clarify.
Well, thank you for taking the opportunity.
Thank you more.
Well, thank you. Mutual Appreciation Society. Still waiting for my brownie recipe. Okay, when compared to the country, back to the document from the NMA. When compared to the country that is almost 2 times higher than the national average, Nebraska's 5-year claim severity average between 2016 and 2020 is $512,800 $873. And the country's average for the same time period is $379,058. While the fund's assets may give the illusion that there's no urgency to address these trends, the fund must maintain a strong operating reserve to address future uncertainties, such as unanticipated fluctuations in claim costs, operational expenses, and investment activity. I'm going to pause for a second because in case I run out of time. So I was talking about, I didn't realize that the NMA, so the NMA, the Nebraska Medical Association, sorry, I'll try not to do alphabet soup here. The Medical Association came as a proponent of LB 68, and in their testimony, they talked about or referenced that the Hospital Association would be in opposition, and the Hospital Association actually testified in neutral, but there's no copy, or at least I do not have a copy of the Hospital Association's testimony. And what I'm intrigued about, and maybe members that are on the committee can speak to, is what was the Hospital Association's testimony? Why were they neutral instead of in support or in opposition? Probably won't change my vote. I've previously stated where my level of appreciation is on the Hospital Association's lack of engagement in this legislative session is around healthcare issues, unless they specifically have to do with their bottom line. So neither here nor there for how I'll vote on something, but curious nonetheless. Okay, back to the document from the Medical Association. Nebraska has among the lowest malpractice insurance rates in the country, in large part due to success of the Excess Liability Fund. If not for the fund, the rising severity of claims in Nebraska would be even more troublesome for the future of Nebraska's hospitals, physicians, and CRNAs. And then there is a Excess Liability Fund indicated surcharge based on excess claims made experienced through June 30, 2022. And I swear as the day goes on, my eyes get worse every day. I start out and I'm like, I can read whatever's in front of me. And then it's like 2 o'clock and I'm like,
1 minute.
I don't know if I should have it up close or further away. I've got my progressives. And so I'm like reading and then moving my glasses around. The struggles of aging, I guess. So I can't read this chart. That's all to say that I can't read that chart. It's too small. There is the Nebraska Hospital Medical Liability Act. Another testimony from David Buntain that if anybody yields me additional time, because I am out of time, that I will continue on sharing in my next time on the microphone. I know that I was doing my math earlier, I don't know what everybody else is trying to do. I'm trying to not have to put together more floor amendments on the bill to take this bill to 6:55 p.m.
That's your time,
Thank
Senator.
you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Hunt, you are recognized to speak, and this is your last time on the amendment.
Thank you. I'll yield my time to Senator Michaela Kavanaugh.
Senator Kavanaugh, you have 4 minutes, 52 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. One day, I don't know if it was yesterday or last week, and I mentioned Senator Dungan, and I said Senator George Dungan. And I guess in my head, whenever anyone references me on the floor, they always say my first name because there's 2 Senator Kavanaughs. And so every once in a while, I almost said, thank you, Senator Megan Hunt, is where I was going with that. So if I say your first name when saying your full name on the floor, it's just some sort of weird mechanism in my brain, I guess. Okay. The Nebraska Hospital Medical Liability Act, and this is a testimony from David Buntain from the Nebraska Medical Association. Purposes of law C neb.rev.stat. Whatever that little weird mark is. I'm sure it has a name when we're talking about statutes. It looks like 2 S's on top of each other, which it probably is, state statute, maybe that's what it is, 44-2801. The NHMLA was enacted, that's the Nebraska Hospital Medical Liability Act, was enacted in 1976 to improve the availability and affordability of medical liability insurance for hospitals, physicians, nurses, and nurse anesthetists, encourage physicians to locate and practice in Nebraska, improve availability and affordability of medical services in Nebraska. Basic features of the law. Providers who elect to participate must provide proof of insurance coverage to the Nebraska Department of Insurance, or DOI. Physicians and CRNAs have a $500,000 per occurrence and $1 million aggregate. Hospitals have a $500,000 per occurrence and $3 million aggregate. Participating providers must pay a surcharge on their liability insurance premiums to the Department of Insurance, which funds the Excess Liability Fund. The Excess Liability Fund covers judgments and settlements above the underlying coverage up to the statutory cap on damage recoveries. This is a list from 1976 to 1984. It was 500,000, 1985 to 1992, 1 million, 1993 to 2003. That's a long time for it to stay the same, but it was 1,250,000. 2004 to 2014, it was 1,750,000. And 2015 to present, it is 2,250,000. 4,300 practitioners and entities participate in the fund. 3,800 physicians, 360 CRNAs, and 145 hospitals. Status of fund as of March 31st, 2021. Fund balance is affected by number of claims, severity of claims, and investment performance of fund. Fund balance, $100.9 million. Since 2014, estimated liabilities have risen from $18.8 million to $42.3 million. Operating reserve has decreased from $74.1 million to $58.6 million. Impact.
1 minute.
Thank you. Impact of Hospital Medical Liability Act. It has greatly improved the availability and affordability of medical liability insurance, assuring that there is coverage for patient claims. It has had a positive impact in recruiting physicians and nurse anesthetists to practice in Nebraska and has helped with access to physician and hospital services in critical access areas. It has reduced medical costs through reduction insurance premiums for participating providers. Well, it sounds like it has done the three things that it set out to do in 1976. Sounds like it is doing them. So it's one of those things where the intentionality behind the legislation seems to be working exactly as it was intended, which is a great thing. Thank you, Mr. President.
That's your time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Jacobson, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Kavanaugh, I'm going to help you a little bit here with the filibuster by answering some questions. But I want to thank you, first of all, for keeping the debate relevant to the bill. I appreciate that. I am concerned with the big monster bills here that we can get into debate. And even though we're going to take 8 hours, at least we're going to be able to talk through each of the points of these bills and have good, robust debate. I also want to note that you mentioned Senator George Dungan. Well, I'm not going to speak on this on the mic, but Senator George Dungan refers to me as Senator Mike, and you can talk to him about why that is. So, but there's a story that goes with it. So I did want to address the issues that you've raised in terms of NMA. Why is NMA in support? Why was the Nebraska Hospital Association having concerns or in a neutral capacity? I think both organizations understand that this is a problem, and that's why I believe we need to deal with this bill, with this amendment this year, is the fund is in trouble. And so what's happening is we're raising the amount of liability that has to be funded by the liability policy of that individual physician, and less reliance on the fund to be able to take pressure off the fund to allow it to rebuild itself. The compromise was to put this off a year so that we could allow the NMA, because if you think about it, the Nebraska Medical Association is recognizing that their physicians need to have this fund in place. And so they recognize their liability insurance is going to go up because they're going to have a larger liability that they're going to have to be paying a premium against or for. At the same time, the Hospital Association, what's happening over the years is more and more physicians are finding that because of all the red tape, and particularly in rural areas, because of the limited number of practitioners, they're interested in being employed by the hospitals as opposed to running a private practice. It's not because they don't want to be independent. It's because they don't want to deal with all the red tape, Medicare, Medicaid reimbursements, dealing with all of the overhead that goes with that. They would prefer to practice medicine. So now you can imagine if you have all these employed physicians working at a hospital, and all of a sudden you shift the liability insurance premiums on all of these hospitals employed by the hospital, they're going to have to pay that premium. And they're all looking at very minimal bottom lines. And I would say most rural hospitals across the state the last couple of years have lost money, and the margins are very, very tight. So they're very concerned about seeing a huge increase in liability insurance premiums to pay premiums for their physicians that are employed. And so that's why they were in a neutral position. They were initially opposed, went to neutral by moving this out a year. And that's why I think it's important that we do move this forward. It doesn't diminish the concerns that Senator Wayne has. And if there's a way to do an interim study and to do a broader look at medical malpractice and be able to make it more cost effective, I'm all ears. But all I know is that the NMA and the Nebraska Hospital Association recognize the concerns of the fund today, and we need to take steps to move forward. And so what we were really dealing with in the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee is really who's paying what portion of the liability premiums basically that need to be handled. And we're not messing with liability caps because that would make sense to be in judiciary. So that's why I think it's important to move the bill forward. That's why you had testimony for the NMA and the Medical Association. Thank you, Mr. President. That's why they were not totally on the same page, but ultimately came into agreement that this is the best solution to really save the fund. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Seeing no one in the queue, Senator Wayne, you are recognized to close on FA 57. There's been a request for a call of the House. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
10 ayes, 2 nays, place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator Wayne, you're recognized now to do your close on FA 57.
Thank you, colleagues. As colleagues are coming in, I just want people to understand, again, I am not necessarily opposed to LB 68. I think it's a timing issue. Again, we just heard from Senator Jacobson that supposedly the fund is super underfunded. I can submit to you that 2 years ago, that was not the case when they talked to Senator Lathrop. What happened? We should know. We should figure out what's going on. We should look into these things. I don't think we should just fund a portion of it and not have our overall discussion about everything. And so to Senator Reepe's point about Iowa didn't have caps, that's why they passed a comprehensive reform this year to save rural hospitals. Again, by looking at all sides. We're only taking one piece of the puzzle here, and we're trying to fund one piece of the puzzle to supposedly create or impact a fund that is in dire need. But we don't even know what that need is. We only know where it's at stagnant right now, but we're not looking at an overall picture. I think we got to have a comprehensive conversation. And why is that not difficult to do? Because every bill's taking 8 hours. We can do it on these bills. But I think the problem is right now we don't have the information. What are they paying out right now of claims? How are they paying out? What are catastrophic to the point where they're paying above the 2.5? Yes, that happens. They pay above sometimes the actual statutory cap. And another senator just asked, well, what about these big awards you hear? Yes, you hear about an award for $12 million out of Bellevue, Nebraska, and involved a kid. They file a motion saying to set aside the jury verdict because there's a cap of 2.5. That cap of 2.5 includes everything, including the medical. And here's the most ironic part. We have bills on this floor that deal with standard of care and surgery. How is that going to change the overall impact of a cap? What is that going to change as far as overall standards of practice and liability and premiums going up? How is that going to affect the fund? We don't know any of that. So we're just going to throw a little money in and hope in 2 years everything works out without looking at a overall thing. By the way, I was on a school board that tried that, and the pension went further south because we didn't step back and look over the overall thing. In fact, we had to have the state come in and help look at the overall picture because the board wasn't doing it. When we start just throwing money, and I'm making the conservative argument here. When we start just throwing money at things without looking at the overall problem, we're creating a bigger problem. If you don't like how our caps are, let's talk about that. But if we don't know what we're actually funding here and how it fits and how it works, then why are we throwing money at it? And that's what we're doing. And we're not just throwing money at it, we're raising rates on corporations, insurance companies, hospitals, which ultimately raises the rates on us, the individual insurer. We added regulations in this bill. How does that change? We're not having that conversation. We're just going to plow ahead, keep 68, throw some more money at it. And then next year, maybe a year after that, we'll look at how everything affects everything. I'm telling you to follow what Governor Reynolds did over in Iowa. Let's step back, look at the overall picture, and make a decision then. So all my amendment does, let me be clear, all my amendment does is removes LB 68 from this bill. We can have an interim study on it and look at the overall health of the fund, the overall impact of medical malpractice claims, the overall impact of how medical malpractice claims affect our budget in cases of catastrophic injury, where the kids are now on state Medicaid or being funded by the state or parents, but typically those are kids, and look at an overall comprehensive plan. That's all I'm asking for. Not opposed to the bill, not opposed to the underlying bill, but this is not a good way to make policy decisions at this point without looking at the overall picture. We don't do that anywhere else. We shouldn't start today with what I would consider one of our biggest things that we need, healthcare. So I would ask you to vote green, step back, let's do an interim study, make sure we can understand the overall picture, and come back with a comprehensive bill next year. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. All unexcused senators are present. The issue in question is the adoption of FA 57. There's been a request for a roll call vote, regular order. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar. Voting no. Senator Albright. Voting no. Senator Arch. Voting no. Senator Armendariz. Voting no. Senator Ballard. Voting no. Senator Blood. Voting yes. Senator Boston. Senator Bostar. Not voting. Senator Bostelman. Not voting. Senator Brandt. Not voting. Senator Brewer. Not voting. Senator Breezy. Not voting. Senator John Kavanaugh. Voting yes, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Not voting, Senator Clements. Voting no, Senator Conrad. Voting yes, Senator Day. Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator DeKay. Voting no, Senator Dorn. Voting no, Senator Dover. Senator Dungan. Not voting, Senator Erdman. Voting yes, Senator Frederickson. Not voting, Senator Holleran. Voting yes, Senator Hansen. Not voting, Senator Hardin. Voting no, Senator Holcroft. Voting no, Senator Hughes. Not voting, Senator Hunt. Voting yes, Senator Ibaugh. Not voting, Senator Jacobson. Voting no, Senator Kauth. Voting no, Senator Linehan. Not voting, Senator Lippincott. Voting no, Senator Lowe. Voting no, Senator McDonald. Not voting, Senator McKinney. Voting yes, Senator Mosier. Not voting, Senator Merman. Not voting, Senator Raybold. Voting yes, Senator Reapy. Not voting, Senator Sanders. Voting no, Senator Slama. Voting no, Senator Vargas. Voting yes, Senator Von Gillern. Voting no, Senator Walls. Voting yes, Senator Wayne. Voting yes, Senator Wishart. Not voting. Vote is 12 ayes, 17 nays, 7 present not voting, Mr. President.
FA 57 is not adopted. I raise the call. Mr. Clerk for items.
Mr. President, your Committee on Education, chaired by Senator Merman, reports Legislative Bill 356 and 522 general file. Additionally, new LR 99 from Senator Frederickson. That'll be laid over. Concerning LB 92, Mr. President, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh moved to reconsider the vote just taken on FA 57.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you are recognized to speak and open on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. So putting this motion up to reconsider is just part of my general strategy, but seeing the vote that we just took, maybe this motion for Senator Wayne's amendment might actually, people might reconsider their vote, because there were 17 people who were present not voting. And if 13 of those 17 do go with this and vote to reconsider, Senator Wayne, you may just get your floor amendment yet. So there we go. We have done that once this session with a floor amendment that, or not floor amendment, it was an amendment Senator John Kavanaugh had. And I had been filibustering and I stopped, and then it caused chaos as it does sometimes. And so he had to do a motion to reconsider the vote, and then that actually was successful. So if this motion to reconsider the vote were to be successful, to get 25 votes, then Senator Wayne would get another bite at the apple on his motion on striking LB 68 from FA 56, LB 92. So, you know, practicality of what could happen with the motion 958. I'm wondering when we're going to get to motion 1000. That is going to probably be not that far off. That is, we are 42 motions away from 1000. Wow. So let's see here. And I should get in the queue. And so I was doing my math. Okay. I have this motion, and then I have 3 other priority motions, and then I'll have 3 motions to reconsider on all of those. And not saying that my math is necessarily accurate, but if my math is accurate, if nobody else gets in the queue and talks and or yields me time, then I am going to be short about, let's see here, 65 minus 15, 50 minutes, 50. So if 5 people want to get in the queue, no, 5 50 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 more times. I need 10 extra times of talking. So if anybody wants to give me extra times to talk, then I will get to my cloture without having to do another motion or floor amendment. I'm okay with doing another motion or floor amendment, just trying to, stave off more paperwork. Okay. I was remiss on my last time on the mic. I've been meaning to talk about this. This is a burning issue that I've really wanted to talk about. I heard last night that we may have the next Michael Phelps right here at Southwest High School in Lincoln, Carter Brady. And I also heard that Carter is a fan of watching the Nebraska Legislature after school. Not only is he an athlete, but he also is interested in paying attention to what happens in his Nebraska legislature. So Carter, if you're watching, I look forward to being invited to your gold medal ceremony at the Olympics. Just remember me when you're famous. Okay, so we are still on LB 68, and I have got things on all the bills. You know what? I appreciate Senator John Jacobson's comments about staying on topic. I'm going to stay on topic to the package of bills, but I am going to move off of LB 68 because, well, I've run out of things to say on LB 68. So that's why. This is comments on LB 779 that is part of the package. And this is from online comments from Amy Benke from representing the Healthcare Association of Nebraska. And let's see here. On behalf of Nebraska's 7 federally qualified health centers, FQHCs, and the over 113,000 patients they serve each year, the Healthcare Association of Nebraska, or HCAN, submits this letter in support of LB 779. Nebraska's 7 FQHCs are nonprofit, community-based organizations that provide high-quality medical, dental, behavioral, pharmacy, and support services to persons of all ages. We have a firm belief and commitment to ensuring that all Nebraskans have access to high-quality health care regardless of their income or insurance status. Nebraska FQHCs are a critical component of the safety net in Nebraska. Nearly 37% of health center patients are uninsured and 92% are low income. Access to insulin is critical to the management of diabetes, and lack of access can turn a treatable illness into a fatal disease. The cost of insulin has tripled over the past decade, while out-of-pocket costs have doubled. One study found that nearly 1 in 4 individuals either did not use or used less insulin than prescribed due to costs. This is especially true of low-income patients. In 2021, Nebraska health centers served 9,600 diabetic patients, a majority of whom were low income. Our health centers are all too familiar with the serious negative effects that lack of access to insulin medications can have. One of our health care center patients, quote, Mike, was diagnosed with diabetes at age 32 when he went to the emergency room with a blood sugar over 600. He works to support his young family with 2 part-time jobs in a restaurant and a warehouse. He does not qualify for insurance coverage at his work, and he does not earn enough to purchase insurance on his own. He put off going to the doctor until he was really in bad shape because he just could not afford to pay out of pocket. Now he struggles with his medical bills. Even though health centers can offer him affordable services on a sliding scale, the cost of his insulin and other medications adds up. He tries to stretch out his insulin and eats less, but not properly caring for his diabetes is beginning to take its toll. He has nerve pain in his feet that is so severe, he is worried he will lose his warehouse job. His kidneys have started to fail, and he may face dialysis in the future unless he turns things around. This fall, his diabetes numbers were particularly bad. The reason? He had to choose between buying his medication and getting school clothes for his son starting kindergarten. All patients deserve access to high-quality care. Excessive out-of-pocket costs create unnecessary barriers to delivering this care and ensuring that hardworking Nebraskans can live happy, healthy lives. LB 779 helps to alleviate some of the barriers, and for this reason, we urge the committee to support LB 779. I'm not sure who this is, insulin bill. I just randomly started picking one to read. LB 779. I don't know.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. All right, I will go on to the next one. Kathy Calder, District 24, proponent representing self. I urge the committee to move LB 779 or LB 142 to the floor with support for passage. At this point, there are approximately 141,491 insulin-dependent people in Nebraska. That is 9.6% of our population. After 52 years in education, I have several students diagnosed with insulin-dependent diabetics. The financial burden these families carry is tremendous and should there be more than one child diagnosed, it can break the family financially. Regarding those young people just starting careers and can no longer be on their parents' insurance, the costs are excessive. It makes it difficult for them to support themselves with added.
That's your time, Senator, and you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. It makes it difficult for them to support themselves with the added expense of up to $1,000 per month. As for the elderly on Social Security and Medicare, not all costs are covered and certainly make it a hardship for them to maintain their health. Please send LB 779 or LB 142 to the floor. Thank you, Kathy Calder. And then we have Jerry Doherty. One moment. Representing the American Diabetes Association. My name is, did I say Jerry? It's Gary Doherty, and I am the Director of State Government Affairs for the American Diabetes Association, or ADA. I regret that I'm unable to join you today. However, I want to thank both Senator Breezy and Senator Bostar for introducing LB 142 and LB 779, respectively, and to share the ADA's interest in their efforts to limit patient cost sharing for insulin. People with diabetes are facing a crisis. At the American Diabetes Association, we at the American Diabetes Association consistently hear from people with diabetes who struggle to afford their insulin. There is no medication that can be substituted for insulin. It is, in fact, life-sustaining, and many Nebraskans are struggling to obtain the insulin they need to survive. Insulin prices have tripled between 2002 and 2013 and have doubled since then, with many of the most costly prescribed insulins typically costing upwards of $300 per vial. However, the cost to produce a vial of most analog insulins is between $3.69 and $6.16. When you consider that all people with type 1 diabetes and historically 30% or more of people with type 2 diabetes use insulin, there's no way to reconcile that math. And with people often needing multiple vials of insulin each month, the cost is beyond the reach of many for a drug that is necessary for upwards of 50,000 Nebraskans to live. People shouldn't die because they can't afford to live, and without insulin, people with diabetes die. Rationing or skipping doses of insulin is unsafe and can lead to costly and preventable emergency room and hospital visits and potentially deadly complications. The legislation before you today would help people in state regulated health plans by capping the costs they are paying for their insulin for a 30-day supply, regardless of the amount or type of insulin needed to fill a person's prescription. LB 142 would limit patient cost sharing to $100, while LB 779 would limit the cost sharing to $35. 22 states plus the District of Columbia have enacted some form of limitation on patient cost sharing for insulin. Nearly half of those have limits set at $35 or lower. Additionally, as of January 1 of this year, Medicare recipients can receive a 30-day supply of each Part D covered insulin for only $35. Therefore, ADA supports patient cost sharing of $35 to be in line with Medicare and many other states. We would also support any effort to exempt the cost sharing limit from the patient's deductible to make the insulin even more affordable. The American Diabetes Association believes that no individual in need of life-saving medications should ever go without due to prohibitive costs or accessibility issues. Nebraska
1 minute.
should be, thank you. Nebraska should be the next state to enact a limit on patient cost sharing for insulin. We urge you to advance legislation to limit the patient cost sharing obligation to no more than $35 for a 30-day supply, regardless of the amount or type of insulin needed to fill a person's prescription. That was the end of Gary Doherty, Director, State Government Affairs of the American Diabetes Association. And that's probably about my time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I mentioned before lunch that I was getting some material together because I wanted to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the portion of LB 92 with the committee amendment that is addressing breast cancer screenings. And I had the chance to talk to a former staffer of Senator Crawford who worked on this bill for years. And it's exciting that it may get across the finish line finally in 2023. But I did not know how important it is for people with dense breast tissue to get MRIs instead of just a mammogram, and how inaccurate mammograms can actually be, and that we have better diagnostic tools at hand that I didn't realize wasn't already required to be covered under insurance, especially since it's not really a higher cost. I learned some material here. Many women who have mammograms get normal results that come with a caveat. They are told they have dense breast tissue, which can make their scans harder to read and could leave cancer undetected. Sometimes those patients are advised to follow up by getting ultrasounds or magnetic resonance imaging, MRI scans, but for many, it is unclear what their next step should be. Now, a new study provides strong evidence that supplemental MRIs are more effective in finding tumors in these women than mammograms alone. The study of more than 40,000 women with extremely dense breast tissue in the Netherlands found that those who had mammograms followed by MRIs had more tumors detected than with mammography alone. The research also found that those who had MRIs were less likely to find a palpable cancerous lump in between routine screenings. By the time tumors are big enough to be felt, they tend to be more advanced. The study, the first large randomized controlled trial of supplemental MRIs in women with dense breasts, was published in New England Journal of Medicine on Wednesday. This is from the New York Times, and the article is from November 27, 2019, so that's the time frame we're talking about here. Just under half of women over the age of 40 have dense breast tissue, which means they have more connective and fibrous tissue than usual and relatively less fat. Women with dense breast tissue have a higher risk of developing breast cancer than women with more fatty breast tissue. Dr. Wendy Berg, a professor of radiology at University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine and chief scientific advisory for densebreastinfo.org, said the study's findings were very important. Quote, "The standard practice of mammography alone is not adequate for women with extremely dense breasts," Dr. Berg said, adding that her own cancer was detected early enough to require minimal treatment because her family history led her to seek an MRI. Quote, women should be advocating for increased access to screening MRI, she said. But though the study results were significant, it is still unclear whether supplementing mammograms with MRIs ultimately reduces breast cancer deaths. Quote, the ultimate test of the value of MRI screening in these women will be whether it improves survival, an answer that we will not have for a very long time, cautioned Dr. Dan L. Longo, a deputy editor of the New England Journal and professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, in an editorial accompanying the study. For all the promise, there is also a downside to using MRIs for breast cancer screening. They yield many false positive results that lead to unnecessary biopsies, and they can detect very early stage tumors that might never become life-threatening, said Carla Van Gils, senior author of the study and a professor of clinical epidemiology at University Medical Center Utrecht. Nevertheless, Dr. Van Gils said, the significant reduction in interval cancers that are diagnosed after a negative mammogram, suggests a supplementary MRI may be a life-saving tool for women with dense breasts. Quote, it's not the same as mortality, but it's a first step. It's a prerequisite, she said, adding that the study is ongoing and mathematical models will be run to make further predictions about mortality and overdiagnosis. Quote, there are more questions that need to be answered. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak, and this is your last time before close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay. Would Senator Hunt yield to a question? Senator Hunt yield to a question.
Senator Hunt, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
What's the bill number that you're discussing?
The bill number is the one that Senator Bostar introduced. And now I can get you that bill number in like 30 seconds.
I just was going to start reading comments from that instead of on insulin, but that's fine. I'll go back to insulin.
Insulin is also relevant to this bill.
It is a very important issue, so thank you. I actually, before I start reading the comments on the insulin bill, when I was in grade school, I think it was fourth grade, there was a boy in my class who was diagnosed with diabetes, and we had to all learn about diabetes, including like they had a nurse come in and he did his blood draw, prick his finger and the blood draw and test and all that stuff. Not for us to do, just I think part of the learning process of so we could understand what he was going through on a daily basis. But then we also had to learn to recognize symptoms of when he was having a diabetic episode. And I just remember that very clearly, which is interesting. And I had kind of, I guess, the things you tuck back in your brain that you completely forget about that even existed. And in reading about the insulin here, I started thinking about that time in third or fourth grade when my classmate was diagnosed with diabetes. I have several family members also who have diabetes and juvenile diabetes, and so they don't actually live in Nebraska. So this legislation would not impact them, but it's been a big part of their lives as diabetes is wont to do. So. In reading through some of this testimony about from Gary Doherty with the American Diabetes Association, and then thinking about the testimony from the previous individual, Amy Benke with the Health Center Association, and she was talking about an individual who has to ration his insulin because it's too expensive. And then he has medical complications as a result. So I will say that the bill LB 779, I think in a lot of ways is a good opportunity to really improve our economy, because if we have individuals who could be in the workforce, contributing in the workforce, but they don't because they have to medically ration. They have to ration their medications, and that's making them too sick to work. That's really problematic. And then if they're getting so sick that they go to the emergency room, that's a whole nother layer of being problematic. So I do think this is a really important step for us to be taking. And I appreciate that the Banking Committee has brought it forward and that both Senator Breezy and Bostar have brought iterations of the bill. I believe the iteration that is amended into FA 56 is Senator Bostar's, but of course, I could be incorrect in that. There's a lot of things in this bill. Okay, so this letter is from,
1 minute.
thank you, representing Friends of Public Health in Nebraska from Jeremy Eschleman. And I may end up just reading this one in my closing unless individuals want to yield me time. And I think Senator Hunt is on her own conversation topic. So if anybody else wants to get in the mix and yield time, I would happily take it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to complete the article I started here titled MRIs Can Better Detect Cancer in Women with Dense Breasts Study Finds from the New York Times, December 5th, 2019. It continues, only about 10% of women have extremely dense tissue like the women in the Dutch study. But having dense breast tissue generally makes it harder to see tumors on a mammogram because both the dense tissue and the tumors show up white on an X-ray. Fat, on the other hand, shows up black, so tumors are easily seen. The Dutch study called DENSE, which stands for Dense Tissue and Early Breast Neoplasm Screening, very smart, is a multi-center randomized controlled trial of 40,373 women between the ages of 50 and 75 in the Netherlands, all of whom have extremely dense breast tissue and had a normal screening mammogram. Scientists randomly invited 8,061 of the women to undergo a supplemental MRI, while the remaining 32,312 had only the mammography. Though only 59% of the women invited to have an MRI accepted the offer and had the additional screening, 16.5 additional cancers were detected for every 1,000 women who had an MRI. That in itself was not surprising and had been demonstrated by earlier studies. The researchers were more interested in another question. Did the supplemental MRI screening catch so-called interval cancers that would become symptomatic before the next routine screening 2 years hence? Their analysis found that it did. Among the women in the study who had an MRI, the rate of interval cancer detection was 0.8 interval cancers per 1,000, far less than the rate of interval cancers in the mammography-only group, which was 5 per 1,000. Many states now require that women having mammograms be informed that their breast tissue is dense when they get their results, and the Food and Drug Administration is developing similar guidelines. But there is little to no guidance on what women, given the information, should do about it. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists does not recommend routine use of additional tests after mammography in women who do not have symptoms or other risk factors, though many patients are referred for a supplemental scan. Quote, the takeaway is that there is no one perfect screening test, and each patient's perspective on the best course of treatment needs to be considered, said Dr. Marissa Weiss, founder of breastcancer.org, an additional resource for patients. That's the end of that article, and really the final thought of it is sticking with me. The takeaway is that there's no perfect test, and each patient's perspective on the best course of treatment needs to be considered. It would be so cool if we treated medicine that way for all Nebraskans, trusting doctors, saying that we trust doctors to choose the best course of individualized treatment for each patient, and that perhaps us yahoos in the Nebraska Legislature who had the crazy idea to run for office and come here shouldn't have such a role in playing what kind of healthcare people are getting, what kind of healthcare they can't get. I should put it that way. What this bill does is it allows people to have more options for their health care by trusting doctors, by saying that we trust the experts to use their best judgment, and that every patient can have a course of action and treatment that suits them, as opposed to other bills we are considering, which takes these opportunities away from doctors and patients.
1 minute.
And that's what really concerns me. The American Cancer Society says that regular mammograms are the best way to find breast cancer early. But if your mammogram report says you have dense breast tissue, you may be wondering what that means.